I wanted to show you this morning. This is my certificate folder. As you can see, it's pretty hefty, pretty jam-packed with certificates. It's got some beautiful stuff in there. Awarded to Timothy for being exactly right. It's prophetic back in 1991. I finished the 1992 Gladstone Primary School cross country. Recently, our son Micah has somehow been getting excellence in drama at high school, and we were wondering where those genetics came from. But I found out when I was looking, back in 1993, would you believe it? For a massive introvert, apparently I don't even remember what that was about. So, how many people have got a certificate at a school assembly before? Yeah. How does it feel to get a certificate? Annoying? Really, Hunter? Why is it annoying? Oh, that is like the exact opposite of what I thought people were going to say. Does anyone else have any reflections? What does it feel like to get a certificate? A bit embarrassing? No. So great. Bree, yep.
Everyone's looking at you and saying how great you are.
Yep, thank you. Thank you for selling this for me. I really appreciate it. Really, I guess the point is that hopefully it's really lovely to be noticed for our hard work and for our teachers to say nice things about us. And oh, sorry. When you least expect it, yeah. Yeah, it's a nice feeling then to be surprised, eh? And then Mr. Jones takes a photo of us, goes in the school newsletter as well, and that's pretty cool. What do people normally get certificates for? For achievements, for doing good stuff, right? Being excellent at something, doing awesome reading or showing the school values or winning at a sports event. Usually we get certificates when we've done great things. And so I want to imagine that you're in like a school assembly type situation, and except you're sitting there and Jesus is there, and you're doing your best to sit up and be still and not talk to the person next to you, and Fire Miriam is smiling because everyone is doing what they're supposed to be doing. And it's the part of the assembly when it gets around to giving out certificates, and Jesus is handing them out, and you think you know who's going to be getting a certificate today because you're sitting next to someone who just won the Interzone cross country, and just in front of you there's someone who picked up 200 moth plant pods in a single day, and that is absolutely amazing. But then Jesus starts calling out some names for people to come up to the front and get their certificates, and the first name is that kid who always talks through assembly, and you know that they were sitting at the principal's office for most of the day yesterday. And then the next name is that kid who set the toilets on fire last week. And maybe you're not particularly amazing at anything. Maybe you don't win any sports events and you always need help with your maths. But suddenly Jesus is calling out your name, and he's welcoming you up the front with a big smile as well. And I guess I kind of wonder whether maybe that is a little bit like what it's like here in Luke chapter 6, because there's this huge crowd of people who've come out to be close to Jesus. Lots and lots of different types of people, and among them there are folks for whom life has been really difficult. Lots of folks who are considered maybe outsiders in their communities of the day, who haven't always been welcomed or loved. And lots of Jesus' disciples are there with them as well, and many of them are in the same boat too. And that's when Jesus starts looking out at the disciples and he says these words. He starts calling out some of the stuff that they've been seeing, some of the needs that are right there in front of them. And he says, "Blessed are you who are poor. Blessed are you who hunger. Blessed are you who weep. Blessed are you when people hate you, when they exclude you and insult you and reject you." And you can imagine the disciples just thinking, as we might, what is Jesus talking about? because this is the exact opposite of everything that we might imagine when we're thinking of the people who are blessed, of the people who get awards. These aren't the sorts of people who tend to win stuff. They're not the first place positions. They're not the ones who are getting certificates as far as our world is concerned. In fact, the word that Jesus uses there to talk about people being blessed is actually the word that was used in Jesus' time to talk about the place that the gods lived in, kind of the state that the gods lived in. That was their reality. They were blessed. And now Jesus is applying it to people like this: the poor, the hungry, the sad, the people who are hated. They're awarded, Jesus? They're celebrated? Really? I mean, it doesn't really seem like that's true. But then before we have a chance to maybe process what's happening, Jesus moves on to another list. But it's like the exact opposite. And in the reading it was the word woe, but it's kind of like how dreadful. And so how dreadful for you who are rich. How dreadful for you who are well-fed. How dreadful for you who laugh. How dreadful when everyone speaks well of you. And again, it's like, what is Jesus talking about when he's saying this, right? Because in Jesus' day, if you were rich, and if you were well-fed, and if you were happy, and if everybody loved you, then you were the walking, talking definition of a winner. You were the kind of person who got a certificate in every assembly. God was definitely smiling on you. In fact, come to think of it, it's probably a little bit like that still today as well, isn't it? And now Jesus is saying, well, maybe that's not true. It's all a bit weird. Perhaps if we've been paying attention as we've been going through Luke, though, it shouldn't be too much of a surprise. You might remember way back in Luke chapter 1, we spent a bit of time looking at that song that Jesus' mum, Mary, sings when she's pregnant with Jesus. And she's looking out at a world that's very similar to the world that we live in today, and that the powerful and the wealthy are at the top, and they rule ruthlessly by any means necessary. They can be really mean and nasty to make sure that they always have their way. And then there are those at the bottom, people like Mary, who do what they can just to survive in that context. But Mary understands that this baby that she's carrying, that Jesus is God's answer to all of these problems, all of these deep, deep problems in her world that seem far bigger than her, far bigger than anything that she can do to help to fix. God is going to answer some of them in this baby. And so she sings this song with this like prophetic certainty that just as she feels this baby kicking inside of her, so too it's like these things have already happened. She says, God, he has brought down rulers from their thrones, but has lifted up the humble. He has filled the hungry with good things, but has sent the rich away empty. And so in Luke 6, a few decades later, we find Jesus standing up and saying the same stuff that his mum was so hopeful for, that things are flipping, that the world is changing because he is here. It's something that's going to be a consistent theme as we continue on in Luke as well. Jesus says all of this stuff, but then he goes out and lives it as well. He prioritizes those who are on the outside of their communities. He brings in those who are not usually getting all of the awards, and he shows them care and love and the sense that the blessing of God rests there with them as well. And so I guess just very simply this morning, I wonder whether these words of Jesus, which are very confronting and very difficult for us to get our heads around, are perhaps something of an invitation for us into this upside down way of seeing and being that Jesus is speaking about. There's that really beautiful thought actually right there at the start of our reading for today, where Jesus says this, looking at his disciples there in verse 20. Looking at his disciples, Jesus says this. And then he goes on to announce blessings on those who have tough experiences of life, for those for whom life is maybe more survival than thriving, maybe more tears than joy, maybe more aching questions than good answers, maybe more insult than praise. And I wonder, perhaps there's some here who can relate to that same feeling this morning as well. Maybe you're sitting here and things are a little bit hard for you right now. Maybe there's a sense of being overlooked while everyone else comes out on top. Maybe you're looking out at our world again and you're reading the headlines of the news in this last week and wondering what possible hope could there be for the space we find ourselves living in the here and now. And Jesus is saying, as he looks at his disciples, that he sees us in that. And then, more than sees, he pronounces a blessing over us in that space as well, a blessing over those who live in the hardest of spaces. And more than that, he asks us to fix our eyes on something bigger than all of this, on an eternal reality which is bigger than the context that we're living in right now. And that might sound really rich coming from Jesus, but it's really important to not forget where we've just been in this Easter season. I mean, the whole thing that we're here for this morning, this whole kind of church business, it's all built around the idea that God is so committed to this stuff being true for you and for me that he enters into the absolute worst of all of it along with us. It's not just something that he's saying. Jesus enters into the hard stuff and into the mess as well. He's with us in it. It's the hope that gets secured in the space which we find being spoken about in such vivid and wild imagery in the book of Revelation. The end point of all of this stuff, an eternal reality, no more tears, no more crying, no more pain, all of creation, all of us being made new. And so perhaps there's an invitation this morning for those of us who recognize ourselves in these words of Jesus to come forward to the front and to hold our heads a little bit higher. It doesn't mean that anything will be immediately easier for you, but Jesus points us out. He sees us in those spaces and he speaks blessing over us in the hard stuff today. He speaks blessing over all people in our world who face the hard stuff even now. And so there's an invitation in that way. And then there's an invitation as well, I think, in that second list, which is, kind of tricky because comparatively speaking, many of us who are sitting in this space, we are amongst the most wealthy and the most comfortable and the most well-fed in our world today. By virtue of living in this country, we are among the most privileged people who have ever lived if we live in Aotearoa, New Zealand at this time. Median income in New Zealand would put us somewhere in between the top 5 to 10% of the world in terms of our relative wealth and well-being. So relatively speaking, although some of us won't feel like that, if we put it out on a global kind of stage, many of us are kind of the winners in this space. And I think it's really important when Jesus then says how dreadful for people who find themselves here to recognize that just being in that position isn't something that Jesus is condemning. He isn't saying, hey, you won in life and that's going to suck for you. He's not saying that being in this space disqualifies you from the blessing of God, but rather perhaps there's a sense here as well where this is an invitation for us to consider the position that we find ourselves in light of this wider upside-down world that Jesus is building. If God is turning our world upside down, then how might we hold on to the blessings that we've received in this life well? If we are comfortable, if we are happy, then how might we be people who share out of the sense of abundance with those who may be less so? How might we use what we have on behalf of those who are in need? Imagine perhaps that you're one of those kids who is always getting awarded for doing their best work, and perhaps your certificate folder is like mine and it's just absolutely jam-packed. You love your name being called out and going up the front, and it feels so special to be acknowledged for all of the awesome work that you're doing. I wonder if what Jesus is saying here is that that's great stuff, but seeing as you're so good, how about starting to focus less on the awards that you get for yourself and maybe start focusing on lifting those around you up to the same level? Maybe to turn your focus to helping them, especially those who are struggling in lots of different ways, because these are the kinds of people that Jesus is wanting to call to the front, and he would love you to be a part of making that happen as well. Perhaps that's the invitation that Jesus is giving in that list of how dreadfuls. To get a glimpse of it and to choose to ignore what he's doing, well, that's the dreadful part. It won't lead to anything good for you, Jesus is saying, but there's an invitation to come and be part of something bigger. And so maybe a couple of ways that we can see ourselves in these words of Jesus this morning. We were talking about it during the week in the office, and Luke was reminding us that it's like another really famous story that Jesus tells a little bit later on in Luke's gospel. And you'll probably know the story. It's the one about the son who doesn't want to be part of his family anymore, and so he asks for his inheritance and heads off to party 24/7, only to end up living on the streets once all the money is gone. Finally, he plucks up enough courage to go back home, expecting the front door to just be slammed in his face, but instead finds that he is welcomed by a loving father and given the place of honor up there in front of everyone. Meanwhile, there's a big brother who lives in the father's house, and he has everything that he's ever needed. And when the younger brother returns, he's ruthlessly critical with his father. Why should he get anything? What about me? He says. And the story finishes with the father talking to this older brother, and he's encouraging him to change his attitude, to change his heart, and to join in this work of grace and giving a place to someone who, as far as anyone else would be concerned, simply just doesn't deserve it. And I wonder if that's the reminder in our text today, that this is what God is up to. This is what God is like. When God looks at you and me, when he looks at our friends, when he looks at our family, when he looks at our neighbours, there's this work of grace which is always happening. Things are being turned upside down. Folks who are down and out are being lifted up, they're being called out, they're being brought up the front, and blessings are being poured out on them. This is the work that Jesus is doing. These are the kinds of awards that he is giving out, and these are the kinds of people that he wishes to do it amongst, and he calls you and me to come and be a part of it as well.